we're staying just here around the corner. But then we just went and we walked down the sea, you know, the walk Lungomare for a while, but not all the way into town. But we just drove through it, and it's stunning. Wow.
Yeah. Okay. Should we start?
Hello everyone. Dobar dan svima, dobro večer. Evo, danas ću vam predstaviti našu gošću, guest of honor, Laini Taylor, spisateljicu koja će danas malo pričati s vama, govoriti vam na nekakve pitanja, a sutra ima drugo predavanje o predstavljanju knjige i malo o svom životu.
Your lecture tomorrow. Okay.
Ovo je inače live streamano sada trenutno, tako da naknadno na kanalu od Liburnicona možete to pogledati. I hvala i dobro.
Thank you. Okay. So, hello everyone. This is the author, of course, but I will take just a few moments to introduce myself. So maybe some of you know, probably most of you don't know, but I'm Joanna Pataki, the translator of actually the Dreamer duology, and I also translated half of Dreams of Gods and Monsters, and we have another translator who unfortunately couldn't be here, so Martina Pranic. So my name is Joanna Pataki. I would like to also welcome you from my position of teaching assistant at the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences in Osijek and our Center for Popular Culture, and from our publisher and chief editor Ana Silic from Vorto Palavra, the publisher of the wonderful publisher of your books. And now, before I give the word over to Laini to introduce herself to you, I just need to cross this event off my bucket list. So feel free to take the floor. Could you tell us something about yourself? Because we can. Oh, just a second. Could you raise a hand if you read the books? Any books? Okay, so we have 50-50. Okay, so you know general idea of general.
Now,
idea.
are these working?
That's for
Recording?
Recording.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay. So, who is Laini Taylor? What do we need to know? And can you tell us?
Hi, I'm Laini, and I write books. One of my favorite things, for sure, is getting copies of my books in translation, and I have a shelf that where I can put them all together. And a lot of people think that Daughter of Smoke and Bone was my first book because it was my first successful book, but it was actually my fourth book. But it was the first one to get a lot of translations, and it's so exciting to get to see them in other languages, and I am amazed by translators who can do that, and to put them on my shelf and to get to come to other countries is just like even more amazing. So I'm so excited to be here. Most book festivals aren't at the beach in the summer. It's like, this is incredible. So yeah, and I'm curious to know what all you guys would like to know. And well, I live in Portland, Oregon. That's my daughter. She turned 13 2 days ago.
Happy birthday.
And she came with me on the trip. We're having a great time.
Okay, so if you agree, I have a set of questions for Laini, and we can start off the discussion, and then you are free. Well, more than welcome to join with your questions, and at the end we will have time for you to chat personally to Laini and to have your books signed. Okay, so you mentioned that this successful book and successful trilogy is not actually your first. Mm-hmm. Those are not your first books. And I've also read, so I've stalked you on every possible platform. So I know that you wanted to be a writer since forever, but you actually didn't start publishing until later in life, mm-hmm. if we should say it so. So why did that happen?
Well, yes, so I always wanted to be a writer since I understood that there were writers. But, and I always sort of, when I was younger, I was writing a lot, but I never really finished anything, or I don't know, I didn't really understand the difficulties that I had writing until maybe university and after. I just have a lot of issues with perfectionism and not being able to finish things and being really critical and rewriting a lot, and a lot of things that I just didn't really understand the way my brain worked. And it's only been sort of recently, in recent years, that I've begun to understand you know, why it is hard. But it took, I was in my 30s and I realized that, you know, it's crazy how long you can have a dream and sort of think you're going to get to it, you're still on the path, and then you realize, I mean, years can pass that way. And I just had a wake-up call, I guess. I went to a writing conference, and I saw just all these people who were finishing their books and submitting their books, and agents who were looking for books, and I realized I wasn't even close to that part of the process yet. I had to finish a book. So that really finally gave me the motivation that I needed to finish. And by the time I finished my first book, which was for younger readers, I wrote 2 fairy books that came out in 2007, 2009. I was 35 when that was published, and when I used to tell this story, I told this story as like, you know, as if 35 is old. You know, I didn't get published until I was 35, and now I'm like, that's so young, you know. And like that was a inspirational story. I didn't get, you know. So now it's funny because, you know, but I think there is a big perception among writers that, and I know I felt this way when I was young, that it's something. You know, I think everyone wants to be the wonderkind and get, you know, have early acclaim or fame or whatever. But then they also think that publishers are looking for young writers, which I can see, you know, there might be some truth in that in some sectors of publishing. You know, it gives you something to market maybe. Oh, this writer's only 22. But that doesn't necessarily sound like a, you know, I wouldn't want my 22-year-old books, you know. I'm glad that they weren't published because, and it was before the internet, so they don't exist in the public world. Oh. Not that I finished anything when I was that age anyways, but so yeah, I talk and write a lot about the difficulty that I have still to this day with you know, with motivation and with not constantly complicating things and redoing things and with different kinds of writer's block. And you know, a lot of writers will say that writer's block doesn't exist, and because they have never experienced it. And I think that writer's block is a lot of different things, and it's not necessarily just when you can't write a word for 6 months. Like, it's a lot of different kinds of difficulty that people who haven't experienced it don't understand, which is great for them, but it also is one of those things where how dare you declare something doesn't exist because you don't have a problem, you know? So it's a bit of a crusade, you know, for me to get other writers to stop saying that. But then also often they'll be like, oh, now I get it, because then they do start having difficulty later and they understand that they were wrong, and then they convert. But but you do hear a lot of people saying it's just this or it's just that. But there's a lot of ways that our brains, different people's brains work differently and can make it extra difficult to do creative work. And you just have to figure out, you know, be really, really stubborn and really determined and figure out what works for you. And that is what I did finally. But it still continues to be a big challenge to get through. I still love it, but it's also a challenge.
Okay, I definitely want to continue talking about your writing process, because I love how open you are about the struggles and writer's block and so on. But I wanted to ask you, so you wanted to write, you were free writing, you wrote certain, not outlines, but drafts of stories which you didn't finish. And there was something that was preventing you from finishing the story or developing as a writer before 35. Would you say this was something in you, maybe your inner critic, or maybe the genre didn't fit? Did you find yourself in different? Yeah,
well, yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if any of you guys have had this experience, but you know, I was a fantasy reader as a kid, and maybe as a teenager partly, but then there definitely is, you know, there was, I think things have changed in some ways, that fantasy was not considered literature, and when you go to university, that's not what you're reading as an English major. And so I really got away from it. And when I tried to be a writer after university, I was trying to write literature. And you know, I was 21 years old, and I didn't really have that much personal knowledge or experience, or you know, to draw on to write realistic fiction that were the kind of books that I was seeing in the bookstore and getting awards and things like that. And it just, I really had no idea what to write. And it wasn't fun, and I just didn't do it very much. And then gradually, one of the things that clicked into place was when I started reading fantasy again in my mid to late 20s. I sort of rediscovered it, and partly that was Harry Potter, and it's hard to continue to be a fan in the same way, obviously, now, but it did. And I was never a super fan, but it definitely did bring me back to fantasy and books for young readers, which I had also stopped reading. And from there, I found other amazing books for young readers, like Philip Pullman, I don't know, the Golden Compass, and Garth Nix is amazing. And so those were some of the ones, and I realized just what amazing books were being written, and it really just flung all the doors open as to what one could write if one wanted to. And it really reminded me of how passionate I was about these books when I was younger, and so it was really exciting. And then after that, I just have way too many ideas. So,
okay. Thank you. This is also another topic dear to my heart. So why young adult fiction? What does young adult fiction have that serious literature doesn't have for readers and for writers?
Yeah. I don't know exactly, and I think that's a question that a lot of writers for young people don't know exactly why they're drawn to that. And I think for me, it was rediscovering fantasy through fantasy books for younger readers. It sort of felt natural, but then, so I didn't ever examine it. But I think that there is something inherent about young adult literature that is about a time in our lives where we're becoming who we are, and I think it's like a very sincere and questioning and passionate and alive time where there's just so much story richness and potential. And I don't know, some people say that we all have a sort of just a natural age. And I think mine is like 17, even though I'm not close to that anymore. Like when I read mainstream fiction for adults, I can appreciate it, but I feel like even though that is the age group, maybe the age group that I should identify with, maybe I don't identify with it as much. There's something about that sort of furnace fire of being, at the beginning of your adult life that's just really thrilling from a story perspective. And also young adult books, I think, fantasy books and young adult books, they can't be self-indulgent. You have to know that you could lose your reader like that. Like you bore them for one page and they're gone. And so you cannot indulge yourself in a 3-page chapter about this philosophical whatever. You really have to just try to keep it engaging all the way. And so I think it's really exciting to write in that sense. And just fun. And also, I want to say that fantasy readers and young adult fans, whether they're young adults or adults, are the best fans. And so being able to interact with readers who are, fantasy people and the readers of young adult books are just the best. If you go to a literary fiction reading, it's just not the same. Like the fans there are not as cool as our fans are.
Not crying as babies, as fangirls. Okay, thank you. So you maybe have a theory on that, but would you like your books to be escapist for young readers, or because you deal with difficult topics like war, or would you prefer for readers to be able to learn about the world?
Well, that's a lot of what my talk is about tomorrow. So
okay.
I maybe say it more eloquently tomorrow. But just I think escapism is something that is maligned and criticized, but it's an amazing thing to be able to give people that who wants to live in our world all the time. I mean, we need escapism really badly, and that doesn't mean that books that are escapist are also a lot of other things. And I just learned a quote from C.S. Lewis, who is fond of saying apparently that the people who are against escape are the jailers.
Yes.
That was good.
Yeah. I agree. Definitely. Okay, so maybe we can start about particular books. So when you started writing, so we had Daughter of Smoke and Bone before Strange the Dreamer, even though they're in the same universe or almost the same world. What came first, the character, the idea, a scene? How did you start it?
Yeah, so with Daughter of Smoke and Bone, and I'm not sure how much of this is in my talk tomorrow too, so with Daughter of Smoke and Bone, I had been trying to write another book and it was not going well. And I was just really sick, it was that, I just didn't, it was almost like a traumatic response to sitting down to write. It just did not want to do it. And so I decided to give myself one day to write anything just for fun. And that day is this sort of mythic day in my mind. It's never happened before or since, where everything aligned and these characters just appeared and they were arguing, and it was this blue-haired art student and her father who was a monster, and they just had this incredible rapport, and they were funny, and there's all these mysterious things that I wanted to know about, he traded wishes for teeth and I didn't know what he did with the teeth, and there was a door she wasn't allowed to go through and all this stuff, and I didn't know what any of it meant, and it really felt like it all came out of nowhere on that day. But what I realized after the fact was that I had a practice for maybe the year before that of doing these free writing exercises as part of a blog. This is back in 2008 or something like that, and when blogs were sort of bigger, and I had started a free writing a writing community blog with a friend in England, and every week we would put up a prompt, and everybody who participated would get a link to their post on the prompt, and so I was doing these weekly exercises for fun, and I hadn't really realized it at the time, but well, my third book actually was stories that grew out of those prompts, so that was a big deal for me, that I actually wrote stories, which is what I wanted to do, which is why I was doing that. So I got stories out of it that became a book, and that book was nominated for the National Book Award, which made editors in New York suddenly know who I was at a time that I was going to be selling this book. So that was hugely transformative for me. That's what made this book a different story, was because the third book became an award book. But also in those exercises, I had generated all these strange little snippets of things, just things that were cool, and I wasn't thinking about them consciously on that day, but that is where a lot of that stuff came from, was just these past, for fun, writing exercises I had done. They just all came together on that day, and I had characters. And it wasn't the romance, it was the father-daughter relationship that was primary. So I had characters and some weird questions. And once I started thinking about the questions, then the story started to grow from there.
Okay, and then what happens to the father? Still cannot get over that.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a sad fact of books for young people too, is that we have to get the grown-ups out of the way somehow. So that the young people have to solve the problems themselves. We don't have to necessarily always kill them, but when Clementine was little, I can't remember if it was a book or a movie, but at one point we were skipped over something in the beginning of so it must have been a book, skipped over something in the beginning of a story, and she said, "Is it the usual thing? Basically, did their parents die?" Because that is just such standard fare in books for young people. Because I think probably that's the most terrifying and biggest fear of children, to be left alone and then to have to solve their own problems and find their own way. But yeah, that was just what the story needed in that case, but it was very sad.
Okay, and how about the romance? When did you realize that this could be the guiding?
Yeah, so I always knew it would be a romance, but that any book I write is going to be a romance, because that just makes everything better. But I didn't really know who the love interest would be. It started from this other place, and I gradually just had this feeling that it was going to be a Romeo and Juliet story. And so I started thinking, well, who are the enemies then of the chimera? Who are the monsters that raised her? And I thought, angels and demons, this sort of Romeo and Juliet, but with angels and demons, angels and devils. So that was where and so then the angel lore started to develop, and Yeah, but he came in later.
Okay. And then you also, we could see that in both this trilogy and this duology, let's say the final installation, even though I believe I'm not the only one who's hoping for Strange the Dreamer 3. But you somehow switch, so you have a set of characters who follow each other from book 1 to 3 or 2, but you also start the last story with another character, and then you somehow connect it all. Does this happen, do you plan it somewhere from the start, the middle, or where does this new character
Yes, I think that, no, I mean, I try to plan, and this is something I'll talk about more tomorrow too. I always try to know as much as I can, but what I've finally come to accept is that the book that I could see from the beginning is not a book I'm interested in writing. If I already know it, if it's something simple enough for me to, like, you know, figure out before I've written it, then it won't hold my interest, and it won't be a book I want to write. And so even if I think it is, even if I think, okay, I've got an outline, once I start, and it might just be that my brain, you know, rejects it out of, you know, just because it becomes too familiar over time. I need new stimulus, so I need to change the story. And it might be that, you know, all the things I learn in the process of writing it just enable me to come up with something. I mean, and again, I'll talk about this more tomorrow, but the whole process of writing a book for me, I've realized, is really the process of engaging with it in the hopes that it will come together and be more than the sum of its parts, that I can create the circumstances for that alchemy to happen, where you know, I was like blow my own mind, or like really I didn't know that's what I was doing. You know, I'm looking for that. I'm looking to surprise myself, and write the kind of books where, you know, where you realize that all of the back of your brain was working on this problem, and everything about you was like somehow involved in it and infused in it, and putting it together in ways that you couldn't consciously have done if you tried. So I'm just sort of like writing on the surface, I guess, hoping that underneath something bigger and cooler is going to come together. So it's all just hoping for that. Being, you know, writing so that can happen, hopefully. But you can't make it happen. You just have to be there writing and keep trying things until it does hopefully happen.
Okay, so would you say, are you a 100% pantser or plotter?
No, like I totally try to outline still, even knowing, because I think my nature is like I want to know. Like I would love to just, in one sense, I would love to sit down and just write chapter 3 today. That's what's on the schedule. But in the other sense, that would be boring, and it wouldn't hold my interest. But I still try. I still, you know, I have some story beats, and I've compared it to swimming from buoy to buoy. I don't, you know, like you can swim to one, you kind of cling to it for a while, and then you strike out for the next one. So you're not like swimming into the open ocean of nothingness. Like you have little points along the way to aim for, and they might change, but it's a sense of the story beats, and I usually have a vague sense of the ending, but definitely I think about the atmosphere, the feeling that I want readers to have, and throughout, and definitely at the ending. So it's more, so like for example in this book, you know, after I finished this one, I didn't really realize until I was writing it how different a book it would have to be. Like it hit me, it's really embarrassing to admit, I was well into the writing of this before I realized that I had set myself up to write a war book. And I wasn't really excited. I was scared. I didn't want to write a bleak book. And I didn't know really I didn't have the story beats that I needed. So I was really thinking, and I came up with one. Finally, so this is, you know, I hadn't written very much, and I just touched the microphone. I came up with a story beat that I realized, okay, I have. If you've read it, it happens at the end. It's the thing that happens with Ziri at the end. But I thought it would happen sooner in the book, so I was like swimming towards it, and it kept getting farther away. But like I had to have something like that kind of exploded in my mind, and I was like, okay, now I know I have a book here. I just don't know how I'm going to get to that. So I do have to have that sort of goal generally, though I do often do a discovery writing too, to try to find what those things are going to be.
Okay.
Just basically, I think when I was a newer writer, there was so much fear attached to writing that it felt like anything you accomplished and managed to get on the page was like sacred and you could never change it or whatever. And I think by now I realize that there's so much work that doesn't show, and that's okay. And it's not like by discarding a chapter, this does not make me sad anymore. Like the next version's going to be better. And there's so many different kinds of writing you can do, because we write to find the story. We don't write because we already know the story. And so there's so many ways you write to find it, and then maybe discard that once you get there. Or just by having that more open mindset, you enable yourself to find the good stuff, I think, because if you're being too, if you're too narrow and like, this is exactly what has to happen, then you're not seeing all the possibilities that you hadn't thought of yet that might be a lot better.
I think this is one of the best qualities of a great writer, and you definitely have it. And also the writing style, which is just perfect. So words or words flow like honey. That's how I love to describe that. We usually hear that first drafts by authors are rubbish, not to use other inconvenient words. How do your first drafts look like? Do they have this beautiful prose? Do you work on every sentence, or sometimes you just...
How many of you guys are writers? Yeah. Well, I think that a lot of people say the way to write a book is to write a fast first draft and then to revise it. But that doesn't work for me. But I have found, I do still think it's true, but what I've found works for me is to write a fast first draft of the scene or of the chapter and then revise that and do that like all the way through the book. Because I have to spend more time with it and try out things, and I have to love it. And I think that the language, I call it languaging sometimes, because it doesn't really feel like writing so much as really clothing the idea in language in the right way. And
a humble way to say.
But this is something I think about and talk about a lot, like just how amazing reading is. Like, I think a lot of us don't really think about this, but we look at these black marks on a page, and our brain just seamlessly turns it into images and ideas. And we, in the ideal scenario in a good book, you don't even notice. Like you don't even see the words. Like there's this. I just think that's magic. And I think that what good writing does is it makes that transmission from my mind to the page to your mind, like it makes that transition as smooth and seamless as possible, as pure. Like, so there's less lost along the way. And I think bad or vague or mushy writing, you lose the transmission. It doesn't come to you the way the writer intended, because that's the craft of language, is the craft of trying to beam something directly into someone's mind. That said, I think it's important to not try to. So when I describe something like a castle or whatever, I'm not going to try to describe it exactly. I'm just going to try to make your mind imagine what would be the best castle for you. You know what I mean? Anyways, but so language, and what were we talking about?
the style. So your first drafts. Do they
so my first drafts, by the time I have a complete draft, it is pretty polished. It's often very close to what's published, because I have rewritten all the way through. With my current book that I'm writing now, that I've been calling Secret Book because it's still unannounced, because the author won't finish it. I have sent drafts to my editors that are much less polished than usual, just because I am trying to seek feedback at an earlier stage, and I don't know. It's interesting, because that's really painful for me to do, to send something that's mushy, even though they're used to it. I usually send in something that is very polished, but it's still a first draft, and I'm still, even if the prose is been worked on a lot, they're still looking at the themes, story arc, everything, and so there still can be a lot of work. It's just, doesn't tend to look rough or messy by the time I send it on.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. And now you've mentioned one thing, this is also one question I wanted to ask. How do you deal with criticism? do you deal with it, or do you just...
Yeah, I mean, I don't read reviews online, you know, which is, I mean, sometimes maybe I do, but it can be a bummer. It can be a bummer because, you know, the good ones are really energizing, but then sometimes the most painful part, it's not a bad review. Bad reviews are just funny. But like one tiny criticism embedded in a wonderful review is like the only part you remember. Because then you trust that they loved my book, so they were totally right about this part anyway, so it's hard. And we definitely are, I think, programmed to remember criticism in a way that, but as far as with editorial feedback from an editor, you know, it can hurt, but I think the thing, like I'm looking for my reader, my first reader, by the time they're reading it, to have a certain reaction. And if I don't sense that they're there yet, then the risk is that I will completely go back to the beginning and start over, because that is not what they did not react in the proper way. It's not like I'm mad at them. I'm just like, okay, not there yet. So that happened with Strange the Dreamer, actually. My editor had a personal tragedy, so she wasn't working. And the person who was filling in for her, who I knew, was her assistant editor, and so she'd worked on my previous books. She sent me the first editorial letter, and I could, just from the tone of it, I knew I was going to have to start over, because I wasn't, you know, I was not getting the reaction that I wanted. And so I did, and so then that's the book that came of it.
Okay, is this when you first started, so you didn't start, this wasn't supposed to be the first book, was that the thing?
Oh, no, so that had already happened.
Okay, so could you tell us this bit?
Yeah, so when I sold the idea for what became Strange and Muse, the idea was pitched as a single book called Muse of Nightmares, and it was about this character who was, you know, who had been in my mind for a long time, who sent nightmares to the people of this city. And as I was developing her story, just, you know, something happened, and this other character came along and totally took over, and it was pretty funny, actually. I was writing a passage trying to understand this guy who was going to be, we were going to experience the main character first through his eyes, and he was the love interest, but he was not the main character. And I was trying to figure out who he was, and I wrote a passage where, after months of writing openings, you know, I wrote many different chapters about him, trying to find my way into the story. And then I wrote one where he was a librarian. He had been other things. He was a librarian, and he had his nose broken by a falling book of fairy tales his first day on the job. And as soon as that happened, like, I knew it was his book, that he was literally shaped by stories, you know. And I just, you know, I knew. And that chapter was called Strange the Dreamer. And you know, there's a lot of things I realized about him after the fact, and some of that's in the talk tomorrow. And so I had to email my editor and say, how would you feel about, you know, first of all, if this book was, you know, about him and Strange the Dreamer, and if there were two books. And luckily they were like, yeah, okay. At first they weren't sure about the title, Strange the Dreamer. It took them a little bit to, but they went for it. So that's how that happened. But yeah.
Okay. Now just one question of mine, and then I will let the others speak to you as well. So my favorite character in all of these, except for Ziri and his, okay, we're gonna skip that part. Those who read, they know. I love Minia, the character of Minia, and I'm interested, when did she come up? Did you know, how did you develop her character? So
I'm going to talk about Minia a lot tomorrow too.
Okay.
Yeah, like she's. So I'll probably keep it short here, just so I don't tell you everything. But yeah, Minia she's why I'm going to talk about her tomorrow is she's a perfect illustration of my writing process and the process of trusting in the not knowing, because I did not know. She just was, I just had this idea for a kid who didn't grow old, a kid who had been 6 years old for 15 years. And I just thought that was cool and weird. There was like nothing more consciously about her than that. And by the, as things went on, she absolutely became the emotional center of the book. And I realized, the center of things that I was working out, just as we read and write fantasy to make sense of and cope with the world, that she was, really my way of asking a couple of big questions. And that's why, I really think that having faith in your unconscious as you work through stories, that giving yourself space to experiment so that you can surprise yourself. Minia is, for me, the classic example of that. Yeah, and I'll talk more about her tomorrow. But yeah, she's a doozy.
I think she's, well, I don't want to spoil it. I have a very strong adjective about her. Okay, so thank you. This was all, let's say, for my questions for now. You're free to ask Laini. Okay.
Hi. I have to admit I haven't read.
Okay.
So I'll ask, what's your favorite point of view? First person, third person, limited, far, distant, close?
Yeah. I wrote almost only in third person, multiple points of view, close, and I love that for the ability to decide, which point of view is the best for each scene, and it gives you kind of like a cinematographer, almost like a camera angle to but more internal as well. What's the best way to reveal this, in whose eyes do we want to see this, and so it gives you a lot to work with, but it also can get more complicated, and so I spent a lot of time, I actually made a list earlier this year, how to write simpler, shorter books next time, and one of them was single point of view, but I do love being able to look at, when it's a romance, what each person's, thinking about the other. It's just too much fun to pass up. And I've only written a little bit in first person, and I find it very challenging, but I really enjoy it. I guess it doesn't totally feel natural, but then until I don't know. I think it's writing to find the story and the character. Maybe. It's always hard, but I think it's maybe even harder to find the voice. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I will go back to something that you said a bit earlier about how it's easy to lose fantasy fans. So I just want to ask you, do you think when you're writing, do you think about fans? So do you have this pressure that someone will not like something, or do you just write and don't care about anything?
Oh, it's hard to tune out what will other people think completely. I definitely think of it, but I try to. I guess I try to judge by my own reactions and interests, and think if it's interesting to me, it's probably going to be interesting to other people. And but it is really hard to shut that out. And that's why I think part of the reason that, and I was just talking to Clementine about this, that most of the writers that I know say that it gets harder to write the more books you've written. Each one gets more. Not easier. And I think that depending on what kind of writer you are, that might not be true. If you really write formula genre novels, you might get more into a groove of this is your structure that you're filling in each time. And I don't know, honestly, but most of the writers that I know have had that discovery somewhere around book 3 or 4. This is getting harder. And I think it is partly because of that, the awareness of the readers, but also a greater awareness of what makes a good book, maybe, and that you're just maybe a more sophisticated understanding, and so you're asking more of yourself all the time. Maybe, I think not just with writing, but with many things, you think back, things that you did when you were younger that you probably wouldn't have had the daring to do now because you know better or whatever, and yet those leaps of faith or they can pay off. I mean, there was things structurally I did in this book that if I'd been thinking about it, if I'd like been reading how to write a books, I would never have done it because, there's a flashback that takes up like almost the whole, last quarter of the book, and that's something that on paper would sound like a bad idea, but is really the only way to tell this story. And so, when I do look at the writing books, because it does sound really appealing sometimes to just fill in a structure and have an outline, but my stories don't fit into them at all. Also, they don't have multiple points of view. But I do think, I always want to write books like I'm writing, but I do think it would be really nice to also have a kind of book that I can write really quickly on a structure. And when I say that there's no criticism for books that are outlined and structured and that are on a formula. I think that they are that way because our brains respond to them really well, and that it's been refined down to this this is the perfect structure for the human brain, And so I have no criticism of that, and I think it would actually be really, really nice to try writing those in a less, because my process is really stressful, to begin a 2 or 3 year journey with something that you don't know if it's going to pan out. It's it's insane. And I always try to not do that, but it always becomes that anyway. So it would be nice to just have some books that I also write that are, more of a formula that I can write in a few months or something like that, and not completely stress about as in the same way. I don't know. But yeah, hopefully you guys won't have the experience of it getting harder as you go on. But
what are some of your literary idols? Some other authors who you would say you want to be like them?
This is always, whenever I always go blank when it's books and authors, but let me, want to be like them. A few of my favorite authors, I'm not sure if let's see, so I'm blanking on some names. I had it a minute ago, and just because I said you're going to forget names, it goes out of my head. Okay, thank you. I have it back. There's an author from New Zealand named Elizabeth Knox, Knox, and she's incredible. And she's written this literary horror novel called Wake that is absolutely incredible. And what I love about her books, some of her books are literary fiction, and she's written some YA books that are fantasy. The Dream Hunter duet was how I found her, and they are incredible. And what I think I love is that they're literary fiction, but they're genre too. Too often when a literary writer writes genre fiction, it's only using the trappings, it's only using the set dressing of fantasy. There's dragons, but it's still literary fiction. You're going to still finish the book feeling you're still not going to get what you want out of it. Because I think we go to genre books because they give us what we want and what we need. That's what tropes do. They plug straight into our soul and give us these things that we need that we don't get out of real life. And I think literary fiction unplugs that plug. It's it just sort of casts us into reality and says, just deal with it or whatever. I mean, it gives us this painful dose of reality in a beautiful way. Whereas fantasy, gives us hope and honor and beauty and all these things. And it also gives us satisfaction. And if you finish a fantasy series and it's vague and wishy-washy and you don't know what really happened, you're this is bullshit, I want a refund. But if you read literary fiction, that's what you expect. And so Elizabeth Knox writes beautiful literary fantasy that totally pays off, and it has some really a really cool magic twist that you never saw coming, and it's that is very satisfying that way. So yes. And Frances Harding is an English writer who writes for younger readers, and they're just the same thing again, where it's this incredible mix of beautiful literary prose, but with totally genre fulfilling, satisfying, gorgeous stories. And she's got a lot of books, so it's exciting.
Okay. Thank you. Mm-hmm. We had another one.
Yeah, I have yet to read Strange Dreamer, and I read the trilogy fairly recently. I have actually two questions.
Mm-hmm.
that you planned on, or was it
Which
something
which
that
part?
came up?
We haven't been acquainted yet.
Oh,
We
no.
haven't met yet.
Oh, thank you. You know, I can't remember exactly how that came about, but with the end of Dreams of Gods and Monsters, you know, I had been writing these books for so long at this point. I mean, now it doesn't seem so long in retrospect, but it was like 5 or 6 years that I was writing this trilogy. And I started writing this one when I was pregnant with Clementine. So the whole time I was writing these books, you know, I had a baby at home. And so it was like, and I would go away on retreats sometimes to finish the book. I went to a hotel in town for a few days to finish this one, and then it became part of my process, like only once or twice a year, to go away for 4 days, 2 days. And with Dreams of Gods and Monsters, by the time I got to the end, the last quarter of the book, I had gone out to the Oregon coast for a week to finish the book, because it was really needed to be finished. And it was like, it was really magical, because I had been setting these things up for years, and I finally was at the place where it was all coming together. And so I just really remember those days really vividly, and that scene. And part of that character dynamic was like the part where people cry. And if you're going to cry in these books, it's that part. And I'm like, yes, I always want to make, somewhere hopefully can make people cry. And so that, I remember that really vividly, writing and I would love to write a novella or a story or something for those characters. And I've thought about it over the years and like what it would be, and I just never seem to have like gotten around to it, but
Please do. Please try.
Yeah, that would be really fun. I wish that I often wish that I could, it could be a little easier and faster, so that I could, because I have so many ideas and they just don't, I don't know. Yeah. I did write a novella about Theon, Nero, and it's on my Patreon. So that it's a four-part story that is a Theon and Ruza story. Yeah. So
awesome. Okay, this is precious info. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Sid.
Second question. Have you ever maybe based your characters on a real person? If you would be inspired by someone? I'm asking because of Susanna. She's like a really vivid person in my life.
Yeah, thank you.
Like someone real, so.
I know the answer to this one.
Well, I mean, the answer is not specifically, but I think secondary characters like that are often like the most fun to write. And I think all of my books usually end up having somebody that can have those funny dialogues on the side, because we need that. But they don't need to carry the burden of the story, so they don't. But I do have a really amazing, very strange, funny best friend, but in a completely different way than Susanna. She's not as she's not as hardcore as Susanna, but she's really funny and a really really good friend. We've known each other for 30 years now, but I don't think that I have really ever specifically based any characters on anybody. And sometimes I think those things, they're just not conscious. So much of it isn't conscious, and I only see it after, when somebody points it out, or after, when I really think about it once it's done. But so much of that process of, I'm thinking about the story in one way, and all of the themes and things like that, and that's a lot of what I'm going to be talking about tomorrow, is the themes are this sort of unconscious thing, and it's how I think as a writer you discover what your fears are and hopes are about the world, and it's by seeing what comes out in your stories, not just once but repeatedly, what kind of scenarios arise, and it's really interesting to be like, so that happened again, but I'm never really aware of it in the moment or analytical in the moment. It's always just about the story and the characters, and then later maybe I see the patterns and understand, what was going on in there.
And do you see yourself in some of your characters?
No. There's my third book, the one that I mentioned that had been written from writing prompts and was a National Book Award finalist. That's 3 novellas, and one of them is called Goblin Fruit, and there's a character called Kizzy, And she was definitely based on my high school self, but not completely, but emotionally, like totally is my 17-year-old self. Whereas then the next book I wrote, Karoo, was like the wish fulfillment 17-year-old self, who we wanted to be. And by the way, I love your hair.
It's actually inspired by
As soon as you walked in, I was like, yeah. And Karoo's hair grows out of her head blue, which is, at the time, was wishful thinking too. There's so many things about Karoo are wishful thinking. She gets languages for her birthday, like she speaks like 17 languages or something because her magical father gives them to her and she can, travel all over the world. She's an artist. Like all these things about her. She's definitely that, the character I wanted to read about or be when I was 17. But the other one was much more who I really was.
Thank you. Another question?
Just more of a random one, I guess, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Seeing about a lot of your work and stuff, it's just kind of a personal curiosity, I guess. Are you, by any chance, at all a fan of Pratchett's books?
Terry
Pratchett.
Oh, Terry. Oh, I haven't read very much of him. That's been this like hole in my reading. There's a lot of them because of those years of being a university literature snob. There was just this black hole of fantasy reading that I'm trying to catch up on. There's a few women fantasy readers from like the 80s and 90s that I totally missed, and I've been. Of course, I'm not going to be able to think of names right now. No, I will. They'll come to me. But yeah, and I have read a couple of his books, but I never have really. It's some people's bodies of work are just daunting, to really dive in. But I feel like determined to do it though. So what's your favorite, or what's a good starting point?
Oh, I mean, compared to like seeing a lot of like from your stuff, it reminds me just of like the young adventure type stuff and the characters and all that. And the Fate, like he has quite a few books with like the MacFeagle, the little blue people, and the definitely Hatful of Sky with the young heroine and all that. So in a way, they're kind of one of my favorites for sure. But like it's just awesome to see those sort of semblances between favorite authors and stuff, where you see certain points that make you think of someone else. And
and when somebody is really formative to you as a young writer, there's maybe some homage or imitation that comes out, or I don't know. Yeah. I mean, we all definitely are a product of all the stories that we have consumed, and it's interesting to see how they, But I mean, I think it's pretty amazing the way that our minds will transmute things into our own. I mean, it seems pretty magical. You give the same writing prompt to everybody, and what comes back is so different. And it's just one of the coolest things. That's why we did that prompt writing site, because it was so interesting. Let's see. Thank you.
Like, last serious question: are you planning to come back to Prague maybe sometime?
I would love to.
I live there.
Oh, are you Czech?
No, I'm not Czech, I'm Croatian, but I
Okay.
moved there. Partially also inspired with the book.
I know. I want to see a Daughter of Smoke and Bone statue in Prague, and so many people have gone there.
I was actually looking for the place, the Poison Kitchen. I was like, God, why is it not real?
I know. I want somebody to make it real. And when I came up with that name, I didn't realize that it was like actually a term for. I think there was a term for journalist that the Nazis called the anti-establishment journalists at the time. There was like the Poison Kitchen or something. So it was a thing, but it wasn't that thing. And I know I really want it to be real. I want someone to make that real, or at least to be able to see the set design in a movie or something like that. But yeah, I wish that. When there's also a book called Night of Cake and Puppets that is a novella. That is Zuzana and Mick's first date, and it's illustrated by my husband, and it was really fun to do. And I wanted to go back to Prague to research so I could make a real treasure map, because you can't do that from Google Maps or whatever. You have to be there, but it just didn't work out. But I really want to go back, because it's been, I think it was maybe 2005 when we went. And we went there to research a different book. My husband and I had done a graphic novel together with Image Comics, and we wanted to do a second one, and it was going to be a vampire book set in Prague. And this was like before the vampire explosion that happened a few years later. So we went there, and we were there for like 9 days or something, and we had been poor art students, starving art students, and we hadn't been able to travel very much. And this was like we were just starting to be able to have enough money to go to Europe, and so it was like so exciting to go. And we really looked at the city like a setting for a graphic novel, and so we took a ton of pictures. And this is like before smartphones or downloading photos. It was like much less convenient for photo reference. But walking around and thinking, where do the vampires live in Prague, and that sort of thing. So it was really cool. But we didn't do that book, and so then when I was starting this book, it just was the perfect setting. I was so excited to get to use it. And they're really, to be able to travel for research for a book is so great. And I wish that there was like, I don't know, like a money given to writers, grants given to writers so they could travel for their research for their books. And there probably is in civilized countries like Norway and England, but the United States does not have that. We do not have grants for artists.
Yeah. There was one, sorry.
Third time raising my hand.
Sorry.
No, I just wanted to ask you, one of the things that stand out to me in your books are the names of the characters and the places. Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to know, is this something that you pay a lot of attention to, that you research a lot? You see a cool name and you write it down, or how does this go? Because I love so many names like Glasgow and the Messer theme, that's amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I just want to know something.
Yeah, so what I tend to do, I do, like, if I see a cool name, I'll write it down, but I don't have a good system. Like, one of my writer friends has a notebook that's just for names. But what I do is, and I keep these project notebooks, and like with Daughter of Smoke and Bone, or, even before that, when it started, I would have like one notebook, and I use the same kind every time. And I don't write the book in the notebook, because it's like all the research and weird ideas. And one of the first things I do is I'll do like a couple of days of like name research, where I'm looking for the main characters' names, but then also place names, things, just trying to create a cohesive feel for different groups of names so they feel like they're part of a culture. But I'm not like really systematic about it. I'm not like a Tolkien or anything like that. It's not like, and sometimes the cohesion isn't there, but so I'll make, fill in a few pages of different groups of names, inspired by different things, and then measure them. And a few things, including Thyon, came from, it was pages of moons, the names of moons of Jupiter and Saturn, and those have names from mythology, but also there's a lot of Arabic astronomy names that are really cool, and so some of them are from that. In Daughter of Smoke and Bone, there's some names that are from the nomadic North African languages in Morocco, Tamazight of and those are just really, it's a really cool language. And so I wrote down some of those, and I was there researching Days of Blood and Starlight, and so I was really inspired. But then sometimes a good place to come up with names is maps. If you look at a country that maybe has a similar feel, and I think things like this are getting, we have to look at them in a different way now that the conversation with cultural appropriation is what it is, completely legitimately. Like when I look at a map of a country that no American will know anything about, and there's really cool place names, villages and whatever, and I, writing these down and maybe using them as character names in my book, like I feel like that's probably okay, but then, it is also borrowing place names from a real place. So hopefully that's okay, but it is a great source of at least inspiration, even if you then end up going and changing them, because the place names in a region absolutely have cohesion and have stood the test of time and can really give you a good starting point. So there's that, and there's fun fantasy name generators. They're usually too wacky, but it can be really fun. And nature names, like every category of nature has so many cool words in it, whether it's plants, flora and fauna, insect names, things like that. There's always something good. Yeah. So then I have this list, and then throughout the writing of the book, when I have need for a name, I can refer to it, and maybe I'll find what I need, but maybe I'll have to add more to it, but it's really handy having that there.
Okay, thank Thank you. We have time for just one more question, and then I'm sorry, I'm not an organizer. I don't know what's going to happen, and then we will start with the signing, and then until they chase us out, we're here. So one more question, please. Okay.
My question is, what is your favorite character from the Daughter of Smoking Moon? And it's still the same question. Do you have a dream cast if there was a movie or TV show?
It's funny with the Dreamcast because this was originally optioned for film like 9 years ago or something, and so all those actors are like, they're too old now. And I see actors just in my mind like, oh, they would make it, but then I see them aging out of the role, and I'm like, but I don't know. I think I've never really had a dream cast for Akiva because he's too impossible. Like, he's inhumanly beautiful, and anyone that that they mention in any film conversation was like, like he wishes, But yeah, I would love one of the idea I had most recently that she's going to be aging out of it, I'm sure, is Zendaya for Karoo. Would be amazing. But yeah, I don't really have that many. Sometimes like Brimstone's voice, I could see like Russell Crowe doing Brimstone's voice. But I try not to think too much about it because it's just one of those things that would be awesome. And we've had some cool, fun meetings. But it's just such a crazy industry that I just never get my hopes up. But yeah. And then favorite character. I mean, it's funny because sometimes the characters that are the most fun to write they're fun because they're like the Zuzana, But I would say that probably Karoo remained my favorite character just because, taking the journey with her like that, she had to be so much more dimensional and put so much more into her. But always there's the sort of not the main villain or antagonist, but the semi-antagonist like Razgut and Izil and those kind of characters. And then the friends are always the most fun to write because it just, I don't know, there's a lot of banter and it flows easily. Or when somebody's really despicable or creepy, that seems to be easy. I don't know why. But Minia also was, from Strange to Dreamer, Minia was definitely a favorite.
Okay, so I think we're done for this part. Thank you so much
you
for all the answers. Okay, now you can start bringing your books to be signed, and then, like I said, until they chase us out, we're here.
Right.
Okay. Tihana, tvoje, hvala ti. Okay.